So if you're just joining, I'm just going to give a bit of an introduction, then we're going to get into the real bones of this webinar. Welcome everyone to this Ask the Analyst session for the 2026 9 Grid for Talent Acquisition. I'm John Kennard, Content Editor at Fosway Group, Europe's #1 HR industry analyst, and I'll be your host for today's session. Founded in 1996, Fosway Group provides in-depth corporate research on next-gen HR talent and learning practices. We provide analyst and advisory services to more than 3,000 European and international headquartered multinationals and corporates, as well as independent vendor research and EMEA market commentary. So this year's 9 Grid report highlights some key talent acquisition market trends, including the growing challenge of providing quality of hire, the shift in talent acquisition spend from reach to productivity, and the need for stronger employer accountability as AI moves deeper into hiring workflows. So I'm delighted to welcome lead analyst on this research, Sven Elbert, as well as Fosway CEO and founder David Wilson, to discuss and dissect all the findings in this latest iteration of the 9 Grid. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but feel free to ask questions as we go along, and I'll either ask them there and then, if it works, in the flow of the discussion, or save them up to the end for our Q&A section. I think that's just about it. I think I'm going to ask David now to set the scene for the 9 Grid research methodologies. David, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon from me too, and welcome to the session. Hopefully you find it interesting. I think if you've got questions, please make sure you address them to everyone in chat, as opposed to just analysts, so everybody else can see those as well. For the vendors on there, play nice in terms of the commentary if you can, but please start thinking of the questions for it, because that's the whole point of the session today. So from a research perspective, I got a few standard slides which we cover off just to clarify for people that are new on these, where does the 9 Grid come from, where does the data come from, and so on. Each of the processes behind each of the segments we run 9 grids, because we have 5 different segments we cover, is a pretty huge kind of commitment from our side. There's a bit of a monolithic process that sits behind them, which runs all year round, but pulls together data from different sources and then is supplemented by a big spike in activity, obviously as leading to the input to the specific 9 Grid analysis itself. In terms of where the insight we get to, so a lot of the stuff we are focusing on comes from corporate organizations, both from our corporate research network members, from roundtables that we run, from inquiries that we do, and also private advisory work. We also run some public research, so many of you will have seen now things like our realities research, etc. So we have some specific stuff for talent acquisition, as well as obviously looking at wider HR and also the learning industry stuff. With the vendors, we run a structured data capture process, which has a very in-depth functional model, which Sven will refer to and a little bit later, as well as obviously non-functional things that we're capturing. The analysis for each 9 Grid is basically zero-based each year. So that capture process, we update the functional model. Obviously, one of the areas that has had a lot of updates is around AI, for example. And then we redo all the analysis incrementally year on year as well. So it's not just a kind of add-on, it is actually a kind of new generation effectively of the research process. We do a lot of obviously briefings with the vendors, demonstrations with them, and then off the back of things also additional customer reference calls and so on and things like this. So it's, as I said, it's a bit of a monolithic process, lots of insights from all sorts of different directions. The vendors that get included in the 9 grids, this is a common question we get asked, are based on kind of a number of basic criteria. So first of all, I referred earlier to our corporate research network. So the most obvious is who's actively in use in those organizations. So who are the suppliers to, typically most of these are mid and large enterprise organizations, but obviously we're also tracking that on a wider basis as well. or also who are they considering, who is in active consideration or in maybe in buying process, but also as part of a wider ecosystem conversation, especially when we start talking about specialist providers alongside the TA suites, for example. So this is a lot of it is looking at how those future ecosystems are evolving and who's being considered, etc. We also are trying to track innovator companies that we believe have a potential to participate in that, particularly with an enterprise customer audience, and have the potential to make that fit. But so the concern, this is an analyst decision. It's not a commercial decision in terms of who goes in. You can't buy your way onto a 9 grid. It's not possible for a vendor to pay for being included, but also they can't buy their way off of it either. They can't pay not to be included in it. We get it, we get insights all year round, and obviously we're trying to make that judgment about who the most important ones to include in that process. But as I said, it's very, very tailored towards who are actively being used or considered in that enterprise audience that we're tracking most closely. And although I said there's many different input sources, I think one of the important things to say is, and we run a very quite extensive vendor side process with them. The primary point of view that we build in the analysis, both in terms of how we think about the trends and the realities of how the market's evolving, but also in terms of the perception of vendors, is based around what those corporate customers say. It's very much weighted towards that. And there are plenty of examples in the past of quite major providers in the organizations where maybe because of their customer advocacy picture is negative and stuff like that, we've actually been fairly critical of them within the 9 grid process. It's really important, the primary reader lens for this is definitely the corporates, in terms of how they make the decisions around who they should be considering going forward, and who are their how is are their vendor partners performing, etc. That's the thing we're trying to most do. So although we have a huge amount of data and insight, and as I said, we zero base that each year to recollect, reanalyze it, etc. It's very much written towards that customer point of view and for the corporate buyer, rather than necessarily just serving the needs of the vendors in promoting themselves. The important thing I think always to emphasize is, because people look at whether you think it's a pretty picture or not, but the actual 9 grid images, obviously they tend to get referred to quite a lot and referenced by vendors and so on. But the important thing I would certainly emphasize is it's much more than a diagram. Please download and read the report to actually understand not just how the 9 grid is constructed, what the different dimensions mean, performance, potential, presence, trajectory, and all these kind of things, but also the trends. This is really important as well, because it's those trends that shape particularly how we're looking at how the market is changing and the ability of vendors to serve that changing market need, whether that's in terms of the market itself or the solution the solution trends and so on. So really important to read the report if you can, and to really understand, if you like, the basis under which we're making the assessment, because again, that gets updated each cycle that we do this. And the final kind of comment from me before we kind of go into about the 9 grid, or Sven starts talking about the 9 grid itself, is obviously, research is just the start of this conversation. We understand that obviously from a corporate perspective, many of you are trying to make decisions around partners that you're considering. Sometimes obviously new purchases you're trying to make, or replacement or rationalization of your existing ecosystem of solutions that you have, as well as strategy decisions. It's not just about the technology, it's about, does this even make sense and work? And so I think the research is the start of that process, but I would really encourage you to think about actually engaging with us, particularly as a corporate organization. Your total investment around these solutions is significantly more than just the software license and everything else. And it's really important to think about not just understanding and seeing what's the public domain level, but actually trying to tap in some of that knowledge, that data, that insight we have behind it, whether that's, for example, as part of our corporate network, picking the brains of an analyst or having conversation around, suppliers or strategy or whatever it's going to be, or it's actually in helping you validate your vendor shortlist or your solution strategy, or even accelerate an RFP by getting some kind of private analyst advice to that process. Use us as a critical friend as part of those. So very much, I would try and think about. Not just read research, but come and talk to us and understand what we really think, and how it makes sense, and more importantly, be able to contextualize that for you. The quote at the bottom, it's not actually written as a quote, but it actually was pretty much a quote that was constructed. Is we did some informal research some time ago, and one of the things I'm often asked around, who's the best vendor all the time and things like this, and in a fairly significant conversation once in a public group, one of our network events, I got organizations to talk about like how many of their leaders felt that they'd chosen the best solution. It's kind of interesting because probably generally you get a kind of roughly a 50-50 picture, which means that already 50% thought they didn't choose the best solution for them. But the other kind of really worrying things is, of the ones that chose the best solution, only half of them then thought they'd implemented it in the best way to achieve real success. So I think it's really important not just to think about who you're looking at and how you look at the vendors, but how you put that together and what your strategy for implementation, execution, innovation going forward is. And that's obviously where we can help provide a very impartial view of it. We're not a consulting firm trying to help you implement this stuff. We don't have a vested interest in the answer being do it. If we think it's the wrong thing to do, we'll tell you that up front. It goes back to the Fosway values about being unusually direct. If you read the backstory on the Fosway name and everything else. So please engage with us and come and talk to us about what you're trying to do, whether that's on a structured basis or just informal conversations as part of like a network membership or something. It's very easy for us to add value very quickly, I think, and help you accelerate and de-risk what you're trying to do. And on that note, I'll hand over to Sven to talk a bit around the 9 grid itself and the functional model, etc. to start with.
Yeah, thank you, David, and good afternoon or good morning from my side as well. This is our functional model for talent acquisition. It basically covers the full recruitment funnel from start to finish, and even goes a little bit beyond into the onboarding process, the first 90 days and beyond. I think that is something that we have in the functional model already for now probably 7 years. It's this year actually one of the trends speaks particularly about quality of hire, which is where this really crystallizes in this green area. But certainly a lot of the focus of keeping this up to date every year is making sure that we have the most up to date functional capabilities covered. We then obviously also in vendor demos and corporate conversations discuss the features, the depth of the functionality, how that is adopted across the solutions. And I think this year we've almost doubled, not quite, but close to 150 line items are now focused on AI in the functional model, which is, as I said, almost double from previous years. So I think quite a considerable amount, which you don't necessarily see here on this high-level overview chart, but there's a lot more behind it. And basically that is one of the key dimensions, obviously also for the potential dimension on the 9 grid, which if we flip over maybe to the next slide, David already suggested that we recommend reading the full report. I've picked out maybe a few headlines here to discuss today. Obviously, feel free to ask questions, but this obviously is the image that most people see. In terms of this year, the last year and the previous year, we're already seeing some negative sentiment in recruitment teams. Also on the vendor side, last year, 2025, was probably the hardest. So the sentiment has turned a bit more positively at the beginning of the year for many companies. So I think that is positive. However, the hiring market is still obviously polarized and fragmented across Europe. There's obviously weak business growth, big cost pressure, geopolitical uncertainty. And many employers are still very, very cautious On the other hand, you have structural shortages in many industries, healthcare, frontline workers obviously have a continuous need to hire and rehire, and critical technical skills are hard to find as well. So it's definitely been quite an uneven market. Vendor revenues have reflected that. Similarly, growth rates have been flat or sometimes even declining. And especially vendors that were relying more heavily on job distribution, revenue streams or programmatic advertising were a bit more exposed. So yeah, definitely some positiveness, but still obviously harsh times. The other big thing obviously continues to be that many more applicants start to surface in everyone's ATS or applicant tracking systems, right? So because of the economic situation, people are looking for jobs, but on the same time, AI is putting forward many more applications as well, board supplying and so on. So this, I guess, has made it harder for the teams to cope with the workload. At the same time, organizations are more challenging now if they should even go out and hire for a position, given the economic uncertainty. So the requisition is maybe no longer even the starting point. It is moving even further up funnel, more into the strategic workforce planning, into this discussion about how can we maybe shape the role in the future, what could maybe potentially AI take over. So organizations are starting to look at that. And at the same time, a very strong focus still on quality of hire in EMEA and Europe. Obviously, those decisions have really some weight. If you make a permanent hire, that is obviously a strong commitment, and hence pressure for TA teams to focus on quality of hire has been around for 2 years, one of the highest priorities for them. At the same time, they are mostly looking, the models that companies use are mostly backward looking. They're not necessarily looking forward into this green area that I mentioned in terms of the performance of a candidate. And I think that is something that where you need to have cross visibility into the process beyond the point of, okay, the employee there is onboarded, but what happens after those 90 days, what happens afterwards is becoming more important. And that is where organizations need to focus more on if they want to look at quality of hire more profoundly. So I think that's definitely something where we had a lot of conversations around this during the cycle. And equally in the market, there have been obviously big acquisitions in previous year. Paradox, Workday, SAP, Smart Recruiters. So TA buying is rebundling around those stronger HCM suites. RFPs on hold, delayed, reevaluated. So a lot of customers kind of want to consolidate the ecosystem. So that has obviously put pressure on the specialists. So the specialists on the 9-grid are the vendors with a square. The TA suite vendors or the wider suite vendors are with a circle. And you can basically assume that there's still a lot of demand for those specialists, but it's more important now for business cases to be thorough, measuring the success of that, and vendors have to prove their value much more throughout the usage journey of a customer. So if we look at the vendors, then obviously, I don't know, we typically start in the strategic leader zone. So obviously there has been a bit of movement there. Paradox is a new inclusion in strategic leader. They have moved across from strategic challenger, have seen a lot of momentum on the market performance side since the Workday acquisition. Radency has moved across into strategic leader as well. So those are some notable movements there. In terms of the specialist, Phenom is with an excelling trajectory. in the zone and Wonk with a maintaining trajectory, a specialist, obviously around job distribution historically, but also now increasingly around AI, innovation in various areas of their portfolio. So Eightfold, Aperture, iSIMS, Workday as suites, and SAP, not to forget. Here we have included the smart recruiters for SAP SuccessFactors within that. So that's obviously what that represents. I think that's important to notice. And then if we move out of those zones, some bigger movements from Greenhouse moving to strategic challenges. So from a potential perspective, Greenhouse has been investing also heavily in backfilling sophistication of the solution to compete more at a higher spectrum in the market. So I think that's quite noteworthy that they're moving up market a little bit there. And then if we look at, I don't know who, I mean, there's so many on there. So I could talk probably hours about this. Maybe new inclusion. So Harry is a new inclusion in core leader. They're specialists focusing on hiring for the hospitality industry in particular. So doing some very unique things there. And who else? Poetry is a new inclusion in potential performer. So yeah, quite a few interesting ones. In terms of movers, also maybe noteworthy is Gaia has moved to core leader this year. Talents Connect has moved to core leader this year. So some really strong performance from both of those companies. And I mean, maybe we can go a bit further in the questions. If you have specific questions on specific vendors, please ask them. David, is there anything maybe from your side that you wanted to add to this?
No, I mean, let's get into the questions. I guess one comment I make is going back to the HCM suites and the way. So it's kind of obviously really interesting with SAP acquiring smart recruiters and obviously making that the go forward platform for success factors. And then obviously with Workday acquiring, making multiple, obviously HiredScore previously, Paradox, etc. as well. And obviously that has a kind of AI angle to that as well, doesn't it, in terms of the thing. So I mean, I still think that dynamic is really, really important. And obviously it's one of the things we talk about quite a lot is that the traction, I think, from the HCMs continues to be strong, sometimes even when sometimes the TA leaders maybe are not the strongest advocates for those solutions. And I think addressing that by, one of the things we've talked about before is, and I think this is true in other segments as well, like learning and so on, is generally with the HCM modules, is put more pressure on the ecosystem that surrounds them, hence the opportunity for companies like Eightfold and then Phenom, et cetera, and so on. But obviously the vendors themselves, the HCM vendors have made a much bigger play this year, haven't they, in the last 12 months? So I think that feels like a really interesting dynamic in it, as well as obviously the rise of new players.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe one additional thing to add, obviously AI has been the dominant story from the vendor perspective, also from the corporate perspective. There's a lot of questions and demand around it. I'm seeing TA demos now probably for more than obviously 7 years here at Fosway, and even years before in previous roles. So the way these demos work is changing very significantly. And I think the evaluation criteria organizations use to assess solutions have to change fundamentally. This is really important because the way it was in the past was, everybody was demoing their kind of flow from beautiful career sites, great candidate experience, that was everybody was kind of wanting to convey, and then into the application selection process and into onboarding and contract creation and everything. So nowadays, these demos are more around, okay, can I call you? Can our AI interviewer call you, right? So anecdotally, that means I've been on my mobile phone doing some of those demos and kind of pretending I was interviewed for a certain role. which is kind of a fun experience. I was last week at an event here in Germany, and I asked the audience, 300 people, has anybody had experience of, with AI interviews? And one person actually raised their hand and said they had. This has been part of the process. So we are seeing this is slowly starting to change how organizations hire in actual fact. And while this was maybe one of 300 people in the room, but it was in Germany, so it shows you a lot about how that is changing and how fast it is changing. And Eightfold in particular, Phenom, others obviously have invested in those AI interviewing capabilities. Smart Recruiters, Avature, Vonk is doing it with the CPA Plus. So there's ISIM. So there's a lot of other vendors that are also from more like the DACH region or the UK background, not only US headquartered vendors, but they are certainly leading the field in terms of the velocity maybe. But those other vendors are looking to pick up on that. So I think that's an interesting sentiment maybe to add before we can maybe jump into the questions. There's a few that have already come in.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you want to pick up the one before we hand back to John to do that around the paradox? Why is paradox also shown separately to Workday? Because that's sort of just follows on from what we were just discussing.
Yeah, Paradox is still selling actively outside of a Workday only organization. So they're still going for business with other solutions as a specialist. That's why we have not included them yet into one provider, because I think it is still an option for other companies to look at that. So that should answer the question there. Smart Recruiters obviously is the go-forward solution for SAP. We have included them here in the strategic leader zone. And it is obviously the go-forward solution for them. So, yeah, we've basically therefore excluded the old SAP SuccessFactors recruitment solution from the grid, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Sven. About to move into Q&A. Anything to add to what Sven just said, David, or shall I start taking audience questions? Okay, cool. Yes, so Patricia, we've just answered yours. Thank you. I'm going to ask them in reverse chronological order. Do get them in the chat pane, and also make sure it's set to everyone so we can all see it. So Melanie, very close to the beginning, asked about candidate experience platforms. Sven, maybe you want to take this one first. How are they evaluated? I mean, obviously you've covered it in some of the methodology, but anything else to say there?
Yeah, so it's an integral part of the functional model. So we look at the hiring funnel from the very early stages of how you find leads, bring them then onto the career site or onto another platform. It doesn't necessarily have to be the career site. There's more and more specialists also that capture candidate information around the career site and actually surface it now directly into the ATS component, if you like, into the selection component. But yeah, we do obviously look at career site specialists as well. There's a few specialists on here, and we evaluate the specialists, but also we evaluate the suites. It's an area that has seen a lot of innovation over this year, especially as well. AI is being infused in creating content for career sites. AI navigation, as you mentioned, is another aspect. Getting those career sites ready for AI to read about jobs and answering questions that candidates have on the LLM level, I think is another important one. How they then convert into applications is obviously also part of that. And there's huge differences between providers in that. In terms of analytics, still one of the holy grails to kind of understand the candidate flow. That is what few vendors can actually reliably report on. And for some organizations, this is really a Frankenstein. So there's only probably a few that really have mastered that and can give you a really good answer on where the traffic actually originates from. Most other or many of vendors are a little bit patchy on those because they don't necessarily maybe cover all of the steps. And then it becomes again difficult to bring these things together, maybe in a third-party analytics systems or whatever. So there's a few who do it well, but there's also room for improvement. So it is definitely part of the funnel. If you have specific requirements or specific questions around some of those, we can certainly dive deeper into that either now, later on the call, or offline if that's useful as well.
Thanks, Sven. David, anything to add to Melanie's question?
No, not really. I mean, the only thing I would say is with a lot of these, is we would say think ecosystem, not system, right? So, I mean, this is always the tension between the suites and specialists, and sometimes even component apps or something, is that within a TA universe, obviously you've got many pieces to that jigsaw, and some of the suites are obviously trying to be a backbone that solves for most of the parts, but in nearly every case, in TA especially, is it's an ecosystem problem, right? And in some cases, it's an ecosystem of ecosystems, because different parts of your business or even different geographies might have different ecosystem partners they're working with in order to build this kind of capability together. Plus, there's also a more macro version of that about how TA fits into the wider HCM space as well. But obviously, candidate experience has been an area in the past where it's often been specialists bolted onto things like ATSs and so on and things like this. But obviously, as the suites themselves evolved, then obviously there are some more one-stop shops around that, but also it's an area for real differentiation, right? So that's an area where everybody have been generally in the past prioritizing it, as they're trying to drive more candidates into their funnel. That's been an area where they've obviously invested and often had specialist solutions. So it's absolutely, we look at, and I think that's the power in some ways of the model that we have, where we're looking at not just the suite providers, but also the specialists and how that fits together as an ecosystem model.
Great. Thank you, David. Another question from Melanie. How important is EMEA customer footprint versus innovation potential? Sven, to you there.
Yeah, sure. So EMEA customer footprint is obviously something that we do track, obviously very actively, both in terms of existing customers, but also in terms of RFPs out there, who's longlisted, shortlisted, who's winning, particularly in the region, but also abroad. So that is something that we do, for example, include in the performance dimension when it comes to market performance. Obviously, how often a vendor wins is part of that. And that looks at EMEA. It is also about presence in the region, customer footprint. Do the vendors have local or local language support in region? Obviously, that is getting a bit easier with AI now. But still, obviously, some companies appreciate local implementation resource, people they can touch base with in French or in German, especially in those countries. And in terms of innovation potential, so that's something that we look at in the potential dimension, where we look at scope and sophistication in the first place. And then as a secondary driver, we look at how much that changes versus, in terms of the vendor themselves or versus the market as a whole. So this is what the positioning within the zone would give you in terms of the upward potential. If they're accelerating towards themselves, the trajectory is upward. So for example, the vendors at the top line of a zone, in this image, Phenom, Eightfold, Avature, Joveo, HireVue, Oracle, and Border, HackerJob, and then on the mid potential level, it's Talents Connect, Harry, Gaia, and so on. they are accelerating in terms of this potential towards themselves or the market as a whole. So that is a really strong indication from the report that you can draw directly. Obviously, there's still very much nuance also to this. Some companies are, if they are innovating on a high level already for many years, they might be in the mid band because it's not necessarily accelerating, but it's still very innovative. So there's a bit of nuance to that, Melanie, that is probably worth having a conversation about as well, if that's interesting, if you have questions on particular vendors. I think this is where the analyst viewpoint can really, make a big difference if you're in a selection process to look at that in more detail.
The other thing I was going to add to that, though, is it's also the innovation potential to whom or to what type of target, right? So I think this is where you tend to see, obviously, in the 9 grid, with the kind of, because we band it, we don't linearly score it. That's the way it's calculated, the way the underlying methodology works. But obviously, particularly in the top band, you've got effectively the ones that are able to deliver that potential, innovation potential, particularly to a larger enterprise, maybe more global business, and so on. And I think that's not just a function of tech innovation; it's the ability for the customer to be, as a partner, for that organization to partner with their customers to deliver those outcomes in the customer. Innovation in the product is one thing, but where it really matters is innovation delivered into customers. And that can sometimes be a whole different problem to solve, particularly when you get, the bigger, the uglier, and the more complex the corporate gets, the harder that is to deliver as well. And therefore, it's not just a function of tech innovation; it's also about the ability to transform the outcome for those customer organizations as well. And that often is a much bigger jump, a much bigger leap, and sometimes involve, their partner ecosystem, the SIs that they work with, all sorts of different aspects, and the ability for that to be a success as well.
Thanks, David. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. They're coming in thick and fast now. I will try to get to them all. Question for you, Sven. Do you have a view from Neil? Do you have a view on buy versus build? I think the underlying question here is about whether businesses will start using AI to build their own tech stacks and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we are seeing that already, that companies are starting to build apps, I would say, or for specific use cases, they're building a dedicated solution using AI. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is for the entire talent acquisition suite. I think there's way too much complexity still there that needs to be managed to get that through vibe coding. Also the maintenance. So from some of the roundtables we've been having with corporates, they've obviously started to experiment with a few of those solutions, and then after a while they've realized, holy moly, this takes also some effort and also tokens then to maintain. Also from an information security perspective, there's a lot of work that vendors in this space need to do. You can imagine if you have career sites out there with a couple of hundred of organizations, that takes a lot of effort to make sure that those are not hacked or attacked, or those kind of things take a lot of effort. And from that perspective, I would still be. I'm not hearing of any corporate that is like completely building the stack. Obviously, there are a few more that are building more of the specialist apps out there on a core layer, on an agentic layer. So that is an opportunity potentially where I can help you build and accelerate that. And as AI matures, these large language models mature. Fable 5 has just been pulled. That was obviously another step change in that development already, I guess. But in terms of this being something that I wouldn't be worried about that for the next couple of years, really. It's more those specialist apps that might be under pressure. So the one-trick ponies, this is probably why more and more vendors are becoming wider if that makes sense in terms of a specialism and cover more functionality to de-risk that a little bit. But yeah, I mean, that would be my take, David, maybe from your perspective, or even from like, we could look at maybe other segments too. Certainly this system of record seems to be something where organizations want a solution that still is in place that keeps that core record of the application, the applicants, and the decisions that have been made for compliance reasons.
Yeah, I mean, this is a conversation obviously that we're looking at much more widely, and particularly obviously on the wider HCM, HR marketplace, and in talent, in learning, and so on. And I think there's a lot of been made around like the whole SaaS apocalypse story, and whether the AI kind of is going to replace a lot of those applications. And I think what's interesting is it's changing the dynamic and the assumptions within corporates around like what are their central bets. I think it's sometimes a bigger challenge for the bigger vendors as it is for the niche vendors as well, because the assumptions about they're all trying to own the AI stack at the moment, which they almost definitely can't do, and therefore they've got to work out how they play in that AI ecosystem. Again, go back to my ecosystem, not system kind of conversation, and obviously that's where MCP and agentic and everything else starts to really kind of come into play. The one of the comments that I've made multiple times is, there's a lot of noise made around the fact, well, I don't need the applications because I can just use AI to kind of build those processes, etc. But obviously the AI is dependent on having the data, and the data currently lives within the systems of record and the processes, the detailed processes. And obviously there are lots of details within the process, right? And obviously within the TA context, there's a lot of stuff, and there's also very much legal and regulatory requirements around some of those things, and how you treat people, let alone geographic, differences, and works councils regulations, and blah blah blah, all these kind of stuff. So I think the reality is that that there are pieces of this stack which will be changed, I think, but it's a big undertaking for a corporate to actually build and replace their own thing, even if that technology capability, their ability to do that is much higher than it was when they had to run it as a custom development project. They run it now as AI stuff. So I think the ability to tailor and extend the experience maybe, and then think around creating certain contextual requirements that are either very specific to that business or to the industry or something like that. I think there's a lot of potential around that. But that's really more about bolt-on and enhancement, and maybe cross integration and so on, or maybe around changing the architecture of the stack, right? So especially with an agentic story, and what feeds what and what gets surfaced in what and so on and things like this, rather than necessarily replacement of the core applications at the moment. Even the specialists, I think this is doubtful, but we will see. I mean, at the moment, Sven's referred to how fast, for example, the AI capability model that we are building within this, and also within our separate AI research, which we'll announce some things fairly soon around AI market assessment for talent acquisition as well. And this is massively moving target, and so it's kind of, we'll see we don't yet know where ultimately the destinations are. But it's certainly something that is a consideration, I think, but it's not necessarily what is a bet that many companies are really making yet, I think.
To carry on the specialism theme a second, I know you've kind of partially answered that, but to answer Adam's question, do you see any particular elements of the specialist market continuing to stay separate, Sven, and which ones would you say are going to get folded into the suites, if any?
Yeah, so there are obviously a few specialisms that we have included here. Assessments, obviously, being one where I also believe that is going to still be more standalone. There are a few vendors who look at this a bit more broadly, which have a broader portfolio. But it's still not something that I see a lot of appetite from the suite providers to go into that direction, although I think that might be Obviously still an opportunity for some, or maybe for somebody who wants to be an infrastructure layer for those assessments. I think that is still something that is missing. If anyone wants to build that, let me know, be in touch. And in terms of interview intelligence scheduling, career side, there's obviously been a lot of specialists around that, where the suites are constantly battling about the innovation and trying to suck that back in. Both the TA suites, but also the HCM suites are trying to do that as well. And they have functionality in those areas or are building those out. So it's therefore a question maybe to review that continuously and see if you can pull it back in or want to pull it back in, or if a specialist solution validates having a standalone one. Whether it can survive in the long term, obviously the market is still moving very fast in those segments in terms of innovation, particularly in interview intelligence. AI is becoming much more of a thing, and you can see how, like I mentioned, on being called by those interview agents, you can see the differences in sophistication very clearly between the vendors. So it takes a lot of time to mature these offers. There's even some who are putting AI candidates against an AI interviewer just to be able to flag if there are issues and to test it and to improve the confidence that corporates have with it. So it's moving at a fast speed in terms of the frontier of the vendors that are investing in that very significantly, but the others are keeping up. So the question is it good enough for you in your specific situation? And I think it's, in terms of the market overall, it's a continuous battle between the innovation and the other suites picking up and the specialists finding other areas where they can innovate.
I think the comment to add to that as well is that there's kind of an arms race to some degree within the vendors around the suites versus the specialists. And I think what's interesting, just going back to what we're talking about with the HCM vendors making quite big acquisitions, but obviously this is also true with the TA suite vendors as well, making strategic partnerships and acquisitions. So there's a constant kind of recalibration, which is one of the reasons why we kind of zero base the functional analysis that we do and relook at that each year, because constantly it's a moving target. But it's nearly always, as I said earlier, a kind of an ecosystem problem to some degree. The other thing that's kind of an interesting point on here is it's not just obviously an arms race within the supplies, but between basically candidates and hiring, and people and recruiters, right? So this is the other side of the whole thing is, and obviously one of the huge challenges in the market is the propensity for individuals to use AI to massively accelerate and tailor their ability to apply for loads of jobs, whether that's real or fraudulently or whatever it is, or to, and this total arms race that's there around sometimes using AI to create things on the hiring side, but on the respondee side, he's using AI to reply to all these things, completely tailor resumes or CVs and application letters, and even kind of so support interviewing and assessment and all this kind of stuff as well. So it's a hugely escalating and challenging problem. And somewhere in the middle of all this, we've also got some kind of ethical concerns around this, and then obviously, especially with the use of AI and the decision-making process around it as well. So it's not getting simpler; it's getting more complicated. And I think the constant innovation on the fringe here is what is almost amplifying that acceleration in some ways, and it becoming more and more complex to understand how you actually do this well.
Thanks, David. Okay, we've got two or three more. There's William's asking, this is more general questions. David, I'll come to you first. How do you define presence? Is it to do with size of clients or something else, or both?
Yeah, so presence is is a view of kind of, as the word says, really the presence this kind of company has in the market. So it's the size that they operate. I mean, one of the factors Sven referred to it earlier is generally with all our 9 grids, they're EMEA weighted global. So we are particularly looking at solutions that are most relevant to an EMEA headquartered enterprise organization, so multinationals or the EMEA globals or international firms and so on. So, what's their presence in the market? Sometimes you find a vendor that's very large in the US, but doesn't operate outside that. So therefore, that will get marked down because their presence in EMEA is actually not that high. And there's a few vendors on this which are kind of impacted by that. It's kind of turnover, it's number of customers, it's kind of revenues, it's presence within the market as a whole, and so on. There is a slight difference is when we look at performance. Sven already referred to. We look at performances including market and customer performance. So this is on the performance thing, we're looking often at how often somebody is shortlisted, for example, and how often they are kind of chosen. That's part of the performance dimension. But presence is just generally their overall scale and presence in the market, and their the size that they operate at and so on. But with this kind of EMEA weighted global lens on top of it as well.
Right. Anything to add, Sven, or shall I move on?
No, it's fine.
Cool. Okay. So a couple more questions, and I think we have time maybe for one more after that too, or maybe not. Frank Steitenroth asks, how do you see dependencies from vendors when it comes to build agentic AI use cases? Many organizations started to build their own, but I see much complexity and missing scalability. I should have maybe not bothered with his surname in case I got it wrong. Sven, to you.
Yeah, it's probably pronounced Steitenroth if it's from Germany. Anyway, but not a problem, John. I guess in terms of the question, you're right. Obviously, many organizations have started to play with the idea and implemented a few actually. What you need is probably in a global, very complex organization, these agents can grow very quickly, very significantly. You need a governance layer across it that allows you to manage that professionally so that you know what is going on where in the business, where in the world. So I think from that perspective, organizations are realizing that has obviously ramifications, has a bit of an impact on the resources needed to manage all of that. So it's definitely something where we see vendors provide platforms also here in this segment on the HCM side as well, obviously in other segments as well, but even beyond HR, obviously there's platforms doing these things. So that is another battle that is going on at the same time. Like what we are seeing here is that in terms of TA, that the verticalization of these agents, the ability of these agents to perform in specific verticals is not an easy problem to tackle. So that actually does need quite a bit of work. And so I think from that perspective, especially large global complex organizations that operate across multiple sectors potentially or and geographies will definitely need a more sophisticated platform in that sense. David, anything you wanna add on that?
No.
No.
Okay.
Okay, I think that brings us to the wrap up. Adam, I'm sorry we didn't get to your question, but no doubt Sven and David will be very happy to answer it afterwards. Link up with them on LinkedIn if you aren't connected already. So if we can have the next slide, just a bit of more information about what to do next. There is, of course, the full report for the 9 Grid for Talent Acquisition to read, as well as inputting to our 2026 TA Realities Research, which I believe is just about still open. We'll be presenting our exclusive findings at RecFest this year, but the survey is still open. 2 thumbs up there from the analysts. So do get your opinions, insights in. Also, maybe a little bit of information, David, about the AI project, which is now in its 2nd year, and we're building on everything that we've already done in 2025?
Yeah, so I mean, I referred to this a couple of times, and Sven has as well. But in addition to the 9good research, we've been running a huge parallel project looking at AI, which also has activity in each of the segments as well as some overall stuff as well. And obviously, this is really the biggest topic of the lot for many organizations. Especially the vendors, huge amounts of vendor roadmap and maps into this, but also from a corporate point of view, I mean, trying to understand, what is the potential with AI, and not just as an overall topic, but on a much more granular use case level and so on. And we're running a multi-phase project within that, and with annual updates to it as well. We're in the process of pulling together our AI market assessment, which is looking at the vendor side roadmaps and things, and obviously looking at how fast is that changing. So you'll see some stuff from us in the next couple of weeks or so. But from a corporate point of view, there's also an opportunity to engage in that as a core participant as well, and to drill into it, whether that's on a TA only specific, because there's a specific TA segment research going on around this. And in particular, the next stage is not just looking at what the roadmap is and what the kind of functional capability around AI, but actually look at adoption and value. So in particular, how in terms of these innovations, what proportion of customers are using it, what kind of value they're extracting from it, how is that changing what their strategy is, and so on. And certainly there's, one of the things I would certainly say from a corporate point of view is, again, don't just read the report, kind of read the reports when they come out. I think if you're trying to make decisions around this, it's better to get up front on this and start to engage in the process as well. There's a couple of different layers to that opportunity on the corporate side, including, a very engaged level, but also sort of ones where it's kind of participation, but with some private opportunity to get analyst input around it and to understand the inside story on the data. We're also running benchmarking related activities for organizations and so on. If Jack's who's facilitating this overall is on this thing today. But if you contact Jack, he can talk to you, provide more information around being a core participant in that project, and as a corporate organization. Obviously, for the vendors, there's also an opportunity for them to participate in that research as well. But particularly for the corporates, reach out to us and maybe get answers to your specific questions or input around your specific partners and ecosystem choices and vendor choices. Whose AI do you bet on, for what and when, and how does that all fit together? So there's a real opportunity to engage in that.
Great. Thanks, David. That's it. So just another thank you to both of our speakers for going through the latest 9good today. Thanks to everyone for attending as well. The recording will be up very soon and you can see it on fosway.com. Have a great rest of your week and we will see you for the next one. Bye for now.